Randy Reed, Executive Director of the National Lighting Bureau, and we're here for the 8th Annual Lighting Forum. I am joined by Nancy Clanton of Clanton Associates, Terry McGowan representing the International Dark Sky Association and the American Lighting Association, and Jim Benya of the Benya Burnett Consultancy. This is our 2022 panel discussion on the history of lighting. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
This is an honor.
Well, we're glad you're here. And Jim, I'm going to start with you. Tell our audience a little bit about the names of the different eras in lighting and kind of describe how they impacted our industry.
Well, I think there's obviously the flame era, which is most of the history of mankind. Then I think the second era really was incandescence. From the invention of the incandescent lamp to its promulgation and use. Preceding really the third era, I think, was arc lighting in the sense of low pressure and high intensity lamps, so the fluorescent and HID. I think that was all followed by the energy era, where new technologies weren't so much as the reinvention of older technologies. And then finally, the LED era. And these are really pretty distinct, in my opinion. And so they really lend themselves to organization that way.
So Terry, Nancy, do either of you want to take a stab as to which one of those eras is the most important or the most profound?
Absolutely. I think Edison said it very well, and I read this quote once, I've never forgotten it. Edison said, with the incandescent lamp, what I've done is subdivide light. Because previous to the incandescent lamp, there were electric light sources, there were arc lamps. And if you saw some of the pictures of these, it was like putting a battleship into a kind of a decorative setting, with a yacht club. It was too big, it was too bright, it was all over the place. In fact, when the first arc lights went up, and that was in Cleveland, Ohio, right near me, they had to put them on 100-foot poles so they wouldn't scare the horses. And there was too much light, and they put these things inside buildings, and people, they were glary and they couldn't see. I'm not sure it was even useful lighting, but anyway, Edison separated that. He made something small, compact, that had a lot of applications into so many spaces. And just as Jim said, in the era of LEDs, we've taken that a step further. We can subdivide light still more to tiny bits and pieces. I just bought a little string of Christmas lights, battery operated, little bits of light that you can set around and glow and glitter. And this is the sort of thing we need with light source, flexibility, and all those other things too, like less heat and all that. But that's what I think was significant about these eras.
Nancy?
Yeah, and I agree with everything Jim and Terry have said. And I want to dip a little bit into the future. How we look at compact fluorescents, and they were the answer. Well, they didn't really work, especially when you put it into downlight, because and they didn't go down directly. But my vision is that maybe we could look at beyond and go into solid state lighting, where we can hand select nanometers and double the efficacy of where we are now with LEDs, and not so dependent on that blue pump. And I'm just going to throw out laser lighting as an example, where we can really efficiently take the lighting and not have to repeat back to legacy forms, the downlight and all of that stuff in the 4-foot. That's my dream, is that we can go way beyond that.
My next question is, what are some of the mistakes that the industry has made in the history of lighting?
We do talk a lot to ourselves. We do have a vocabulary that needs explaining or simplifying, and we don't do that. We're content, it seems, to do wonderful lighting, to talk with ourselves, to set up standards and so forth, but then we don't tell the public who really buys these things and should want them So we're not up to our potential. And I think our professional societies, our trade associations all have a role to play there. I'm doing more now.
Okay, guys, I'm hearing audio problems. Is that right? Can you not hear it, or is it just not current? Now some people are saying Allison is okay. Terry just froze. You hear me well? Okay, I'm going to turn it back on, and let's see if it's better now. I'll turn me off.
The residential that I've ever done in my career in lighting, and I find it very rewarding to talk with actual people with problems. They're very different than what I would have expected, especially when we, right now, I'm working on a program called How to Buy a Light Bulb, because people are so confused. And I think every single one of you on this little program have probably gone into a big box store and stood there while people walked up and down the light bulb aisle, and I'll bet you even tried to help them, because almost every lighting person does. Now, why doesn't our industry do that? Very strange.
No, and Terry, I want to keep going on, walking into a hardware store and seeing people just going, oh, we should buy these daylight lamps and they're brighter. Or even worse, you go to the exterior part and there's these floodlights and, you know, blue lights that are on all the time. And I'm just going, I can't believe how little the public knows about dark skies and shielding. So I would love to get to the hardware stores and really get to the core of the public.
Yes, I agree, Nancy. I wish we could do that. That would be a great legacy. You know, we're all historians here. We've been around for a while. Maybe that should be our legacy. Let's get the public involved.
And part of the problem with that is that more people buy online today, and a lot of people buy from those big box retailers where they just don't have the manpower. It is kind of those local hardware stores where they will take time and educate people. So a lot of it has to deal, I think, with market channels.
Yes.
Jim, let me ask you, what role has illuminating engineering played in the history of lighting?
Fundamental in just about every respect. You know, our understanding of how to use light correctly, to the points we were just making, you know, comes from people who've given it a lot of thought. And the discipline that we keep turning to over and over again is illuminating engineering. Lighting design is a relatively newcomer compared to illuminating engineering. You know, lighting design, if I were to go back to as late as 1969 or 1970, the number of lighting designers practicing that way in America that weren't in theater would probably be less than a handful. Today, it's a very thriving profession worldwide. And so I think I'd have to say that, you know, illuminating engineering always led the way, because first and foremost, we needed light and we needed it functionally. And we found ways to do that. Not always correct as the points we were just making, but we needed it. So I think illuminating engineering has led the way and has inspired lighting design and more proficient use of it in the process.
Nancy, talk a little bit about our reliance on calculations versus lighting design.
Yeah, the one thing that I feel that we all could do, or the Illuminating Engineering Society could do, is we're so focused on foot candles. Like, let's do calculations. Let's make sure our uniformity is. And it's usually on the horizontal surface. Yet we lighting designers know the beauty of the walls and the ceiling. And I always say, who really looks at the floor? You know, except for like a task light. And I'm going, would it be great if we could back off from our dependence on foot candles and start looking at more of a contrast-based or a beauty-based and painting with light. And that's what I would like for our industry to go towards.
You know, that's the rise of the lighting designer, which I think I've played a small part in,
I'd say a big part, Jim.
Yes, a big part.
Well, we all have contributed to that, you two guys as well. And Randy's probably had a little hand in it somewhere along the line.
I think so.
Lighting design is once we've learned how to use the technology, and this happens in art a lot. Art probably began, a gazillion years ago when we first learned how to make paint. And as we learn how to make things, we learn how to do better with them over time. Art comes from the technology that we start off with. And so I think lighting has grown a lot in the last 50 years. And, in terms of the artful application of it. I think if there's a mistake out there, it's been that we didn't respect the environment very well. Dark skies is a primary example. And it's extremely frustrating to me to see the ignorance and misapplication of outdoor lighting and the negative results that come from it. And it's amazing because the ignorance isn't just individual homeowners or people who really don't care much. Even the world's best lighting designers do some not so good things. So it's.
Are we better? Are we better than we've ever been when it comes to light pollution as a world?
Oh, yes. We know more about it. We know more about it, but it's still growing. See, it's a double whammy here. We know more about it, but we have not been able to effectively slow it down or put a stop to it. And I know the IDA says that it's growing about 2% per year in print, but I think it's much higher than that. And I think we really need to put out an effort. And I'm so glad the industry now is working with the dark sky people and increasingly with the environmental people, because it isn't so much you can't see the stars. It's really how that light at night affects the climate as well as the animals and the plants and ourselves. We need to understand and act upon that. We can't simply put lighting outside and say more is better. That's absolutely wrong.
And Terry, I couldn't agree more with you on that. I'm doing some research right now at the University of Minnesota on plants, pollinators, and people and light pollution. And do you know that our moth population has decreased by 20-fold since 1920s? And they're the pollinators at night. And plants, when they're exposed to light, they don't lose their greenery, and they're not adjusting to the photo period that they need to be seasonally. I wish EPA would take light pollution as a true pollution and start dealing with it.
Oh, that would be great. That would be a wonderful development.
Oh boy, yes, it sure would. It's just to pick up on that just a little bit. Nancy, you and I have been very active in this field as lighting design professionals, and I think we've made a difference. But for every battle we win, we lose so many. And I think a lot of this has to do with LED lighting today, because it's so energy efficient. People say, gee, I take out 100 watts of high pressure sodium, I'll put in 50 watts of LED, I'm saving so much energy. I just go crazy, and they do. But the LED technology emits wavelengths that are most dangerous.
They are.
That's what really scares me about what you just talked about in the history of lighting. As efficiency goes up, as lumens per watt go up, the cost of lighting goes down and people use more of it. And the risk here is, as we apply this to outdoor lighting now, what's going to be next? Well, it's going to be self-contained outdoor lighting products with photocells. In other words, the cost of energy goes to zero. And that means there will be more out there in the night, uncontrollably lighting, because it doesn't cost anybody anything. And that is really a scary thing when it comes to light pollution.
Agreed.
I agree.
I'll go back to my original question, and maybe I'll phrase it different. As the world maybe has more information than we've ever had on light pollution, but light pollution is worse than it has ever been.
Yes.
Is that the right statement?
Yes, that's true.
All this information, we're worse than we've ever been.
We
That's
happen,
right.
Randy, because of this sense of, oh, well, what if a burglar comes up to my house? Or I've got to have a safe walkway or roadway, whatever. It's this terms of safety that is just kind of taking over for everyone. And I look at the research that says, hey, we can see better with contrast. And maybe it's reassurance and the whole move towards pedestrian orientation and expectations. But I just feel that everyone's so terrified out there that more light is better. And that's what I feel we had this rise in light pollution.
And there's one other factor that ties directly into that. Since roughly 1970, the population of the world has doubled. And twice as many people are going to have a need for twice as much light, right?
We haven't done one thing that we should have done, and that is we haven't conquered glare. And by conquer, I mean we haven't even given a metric to it. And I'm so glad now the IES is working on that through a special glare committee. And I think we're beginning to understand it better than we have, but we're still not there with a metric. Until you can measure it, you don't know if it's bad or good, and your eye is sometimes a fooler.
And that's interior also. I know that the metrics committee is working on exterior, but interior, we kind of did a poll with some ILD members on go in and look at a light when you think it's too bright and take a luminance reading of it at a different angle. It was amazing on how we really got together and kind of went, oh, well, at 6,000 candela per meter squared, we're right at the point where it's too glaring. And if you think of the old fluorescent lamp, what was that? A T8 was 12,000. Am I right there? To a candela per meter squared?
Oh, I don't remember the number. I remember the lumens, but 40 T12 with 3,000 lumens. That's
exactly. But in other words, go to glare and really start looking at it for lighting designers. And in the history, we've talked about it, but you're right. The UGR that's used in Europe really doesn't work here in the United States. And just going, where can we advance our glare metrics, interior and exterior? And that may limit light too.
Yes, I was just talking with Randy before we started about some historical recordings I have of past IES presidents. And going back into the 1930s, the IES presidents of that time were all excited because we thought we knew how to understand glare. And here we are, a century later almost, saying, whoops, nope, don't have it yet. We got to do this, folks.
Okay.
The key is contrast, and the eye does adapt, and we don't really know that mechanism all that well either. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think I have hope. I served somewhat on that glare at night committee, and because the contrast, the ratio between light and dark is really extreme. And we studied that, Nancy, when you and I were working together on the MLO, and subsequently, through various phases of my work. And it keeps coming up that, we don't understand that contrast relationship, and it's so variable, particularly outdoors. There's very bright areas, there's very dark areas, and they deserve different lighting.
We spoke earlier a little bit about education, mainly with the consumer in the residential market. But Jim, I want to ask you, where do we stand with education in the commercial and industrial market?
Well, there's several really good programs throughout the world. Nancy's an alum of the University of Colorado, one of the premier programs. There's a few out there. But when I look at the number of people practicing light who've got an education, it's pretty small. And I think it just, having taught lighting at several universities, one of the things I find is there's no real good home for lighting. It doesn't really fit into an engineering program. It doesn't fit into an architectural program. it sort of has to, it's hard to get a program of education going and keep it going. The few that remain in the United States, and many of them have come and gone, the few that remain have done it through almost extraordinary personal effort on the role of one or two people just to keep them alive. I think the other criticism would be, I think industry doesn't support lighting education as well as it should. Industry looks at lighting education as a professional education environment, sort of like, for example, the big companies have these centers in their headquarters where they bring people in. And it's a combination of education and marketing. And I think these centers work very well. I've worked on some of them for these companies. But the real issue is fundamentals of lighting and true academia. I think we could do a better job worldwide.
I completely agree, Jim. It takes individuals in universities. So when I went, it was Ron Helms that insisted, even though we were all engineering students, that we take mandatory theater classes and do theater lighting so that we could see the beauty of lighting and not just the engineering side of it. Talk about a visionary to get us out there and doing that. But right now, without those individuals and those universities supporting it, because there isn't that much research money that comes in like the other programs, I feel that illumination programs have really decreased. And people doing lighting design, I don't want to bash electrical engineers, but many times they have to design everything that wires come to. And their load is huge. And how are they to know how to do lighting design? So I completely agree with you.
I resemble that remark. Having practiced for the first quarter of my career as an electrical engineer that loved lighting, my transformation personally from electrical engineer to lighting was helped by some theatrical background and exposure to some theatrical people. I think you may remember the late Mike Hooker, who was a college roommate and a theater major. And between Mike and some other folks in my career, they helped pull me in that direction. Interior designers, architects, theater people. And the cross-pollination is critically important.
And there are really two things today that are really important about what we do. One is really drawing in the contractors and distributors, because so many lighting decisions are made at the distributor counter when a contractor comes in and says, I want to light up somebody's garage. That kind of training I see as being crucial to the future of lighting. And also this whole idea of lighting engineer and lighting designer. We've got to work on that some more. I'm reminded of illuminating engineers that really went out of their way to get into the design field. And you're right, Jim, it came via the theater. If we can keep that connection going, and programs like the IES Teachers of Lighting Workshop, how many know about that? And yet there are so many teachers out there. Yeah, we've all been on the faculty, right? There are so many teachers out there, often interior designers, and if they had a much better and broader lighting education, wouldn't they be valuable, because they're so close to the user, much closer than so many lighting designers get.
And one other thing that I feel that lighting designers are missing is daylighting education.
Oh boy, yes.
Because it is the architects that are designing the daylighting, everything. We've got to work with them. And someone said, well, light designers don't do daylighting. I said, yes, they should be doing daylighting and getting involved as soon as the project starts and not coming in after the building's been designed. That I think is a huge weakness.
Yeah, we won the International Illumination Design Award of Excellence for a project whose number one light source was daylight. Okay, but you have to know how to prioritize that and get it right, and we don't.
Correct. And that has to be taught in all of the education.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
What role does certification play?
None right now. I hate to say it, but you know, I worked on the NCQLP for like 15 years trying to get it off the ground. So did Nancy and a number of other folks. Nancy, I think, was part of the team that dreamed it up. And it is there, it's performing its function, but it isn't as prominent as I had hoped it would be.
Yeah, and one thing that and Jim's right, I was I was one of the founders of NCQOP, and we had actually 4 paths to go for certification, but our funding only came with the first beginner path, and it is stuck there. We had advanced paths in line design, and we also had beginner and advanced paths in manufacturing and quality of equipment, and that path never went. So we have been stuck, and unfortunately, I wish we could continue on those other paths.
Me too.
We're talking about the history, Jim. I think I was treasurer of IES in 1999, and you came and spoke to the board about getting seed money for NCQLP. So that was 23 years ago. And
I gave a keynote at the IES conference in 1997 in Seattle, where I pretty much announced, you know, LC to the industry. And I was the first test committee chairman, and the second and the third. You know, my involvement went into the formation of how it's really going to happen. I spent a lot of hours. My concern is that it had so much promise, and a number of people still honor it. I'm not saying it hasn't had some impact by a long shot, but what happened is that it hasn't taken on the importance overall that I hoped it would. And I have hope for it. I still believe in it, and I'd be more than happy to push for it somewhere.
Yeah, one kind of fun fact about it, when we were creating NCQOP, we had to come up with bios, and Dave DeLora, who was one of our founders, called me Nancy Clanton, Queen of the Lumen Pushers, which was NCQOP.
I think you need a sign, Nancy. I think that's a great title. I was in the first graduating class, by the way, the first awardees of the LC, and I have not let it expire because I have looked at the examinations over the years. I am not sure that I can pass it again.
well, what is the answer?
Well, somebody has to require it. People who buy lighting and specify lighting, they have to require that an LC qualified person be involved if that lighting is to be approved. And we've never managed to do that other than in a very informal way.
Right, the only ones that do, Randy, is General Services Administration.
Right.
GSA does, either a professional member of ILD or LC.
And there is the problems. IALD has gone ahead and created a certified lighting designer.
So is that a problem that there are 2 different credentials?
I'm a little concerned about IALD getting out in front of this that far, because IALD, when I was on IALD board, I said, IALD, you've got to support LC. And I got a lukewarm reception from the board, and they never followed through. I'm disappointed in IALD for not embracing LC. But the truth of the matter is that IALD has got a membership that needs something. And I think rightfully so, they said, we're going to serve our membership. They're not improving the lot of lighting in the world, but they are serving their membership.
What has history taught us that the lighting industry ought to be doing today?
Well, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I really feel strongly about it, and I think it's outreach. I think our lighting industry has a future, and we can build on the past and see what's been successful. But I think unless we keep it in front of people and the importance of lighting, the technology, how important that is, don't throw it out the window or make arbitrary decisions, but you need professional help to get the lighting that will be best for you. Now, of course, there's human health to worry about, Unless we can tell that story to the consumer and the people who use lighting, I think our future is not as bright as it should be.
Okay. Terry, excuse me, Nancy, closing comments?
I just think that lighting design really needs the consumer, the public, to be involved in it and to understand it, this base up education. And then really look at our colleges, everything, and get people excited about lighting design. And again, blending the daylighting in with the electric light. Light is light. You know, we shouldn't be able to distinguish it. How do we control it? What Jim said about contrast, change our metrics to contrast base would be fabulous.
Jim, closing comments.
So I moved back here to Davis, California to try to set up a master's program in lighting. And we didn't have the funding, we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the commitment from the university and the California Energy Commission and others, because the passion isn't there. The passion that has grown our industry very quickly was that energy era. Okay, energy drove innovation and innovation drove design, and it was an exciting time. We're losing a little bit of that now that we're so efficient. And
and we involve so many more, including utilities and others who are associated with lighting, but they don't do it every day. So I think you're absolutely right, Jim, is a publicity and informational exchange that would bring more people into finding lighting of interest so they could use it better and practice it better.
we could learn something from the success of LEED and USPBC. We could learn something to a lesser extent, I think, from WELL. I'm not sure WELL is going to have as much success, but we could learn a lot from LEED, that it was a peer pressure type of power. It was building excitement in ways that the public could relate to. I can't tell you how many times we've talked about the $100,000 plaque in the lobby of a LEED building, because that's what it costs in terms of non-material components in the building when you get done with the paperwork. And that level of enthusiasm was pervasive throughout our industry. It really changed construction. I think that if we could create that enthusiasm for light and lighting done properly, following rules, just like LEED does, we could probably make a bigger difference than we're making right now.
And I agree, Jim, and I think we need to get involved in LEED. I'm a LEED fellow and on the advisor committee, and boy, do they need lighting designers on it. Everything is environmental quality. It's mostly air and heat and everything. Lighting kind of plays a lesser role. And I've been there going, no, we need daylighting. And especially since that terrible windowless dormitory is being proposed, the University of California, Santa Barbara, we LEED fellows, 50 of us. I draft a letter and we all signed it and sent it. That has got to stop. Lighting like that.
Terry, any closing comments?
Well, I'd like to just ask people to think of the best lighting situation they have ever experienced. What really made you comfortable, excited about being in a space and looking around, could do whatever you had to do? What was the best lighting you ever had? I think we ought to collect more of those. And I'll give you one secret, that once upon a time, when we first started talking about electric lighting in large quantities, the age of fluorescent, you know what that was? Sitting underneath the shade of a tree on a summer day, looking around you at all of the greenery. How many foot candles did you have? It was irrelevant. You were comfortable, you were happy, you could do any visual task you wanted. The glare was controlled, and boy, was that a nice situation.
Or on top of a mountaintop, looking at the sunset.
Yes, think of those lighting situations. How can we bring them to life in our own lives?
And on that note, I will thank you all very much. Here's a question from Michael Grabner. What are some inexpensive textbooks on lighting? example, a lighting for dummies idea. Nancy, do you want to take that one?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of textbooks on lighting. Lighting for dummies. Oh, that's a tough one. Well, the one that I really enjoyed was written many, many years ago by John Flynn. And how John just kind of started painting with light and saying how important it was to light the walls and the ceiling and all of that. And again, we're in engineering school reading these, and it just, you got so involved in it and you could understand it. But Terry, I know you've got the entire library of textbooks or wonderful things. What are your ideas? Lighting for dummies? No, lighting for creative people. Let's call that.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to and whether it's a class or just general information. But one that just was reprinted a couple of years ago is called The Fundamentals of Architectural Lighting by Sam Mills. He originally wrote that a long time ago, 30, 40 years ago, but has updated and reprinted it. But it's a great historical book as well as an instructional book. And so I'd start there. Certainly, if the question is about a textbook, that would be a very good start.
Randy, there was a question way early in our presentation about lasers that I'd like to answer. And I think it was like someone asked, how do we get lasers that are not collimated? How do we do that? and basically what it is that even LED diodes, everything is collimated, but it's the lens you put over it that you can get different distributions. And so that's kind of, in fact, laser diodes are extremely small that you can get beautiful distributions with it. So I just wanted to answer that question as it came up right at the beginning.
Okay, thank you for that. And if you have other questions, please type them in the Q&A and we will get them addressed. And then something else that came up in the chat was what the NAILD is doing with LS1 and LS2. What is it? It is a distribution which competes with the LC in addition to the IALD course. So I wasn't familiar with that.
I can tell you that NAILD has been making an outstanding effort to provide education for their members. And I wasn't aware of them having certification programs, but I know they've done probably as much education, new education material in lighting as just about anybody recently. So my hat's off to them.
NAILD is also leading at getting information out about dark skies as well. In fact,
absolutely. They're making such a commitment to addressing dark skies, and what makes them different from most of our discussion that we've been looking at this morning, what makes them different is they are targeting the guy at the desk or at the counter who's selling luminaires to electricians. If we could make that system always be dark sky friendly, we'd get rid of half the problems.
In fact, a lot of chat was going on. I love the conversations about, oh, my family doesn't like it when they go to the hardware store with me because I'm always sitting there telling everyone about lighting. And I've done it too. I walk into it and I see all these glaring lights and bulbs, and I pull, even the manager over and go, what is a dark sky friendly? What I'd love to do is a grassroots type of movement where all of us light designers go and talk to our local hardware stores and say, wouldn't it be great if you had a sign or promoted materials that would meet it? And some cities that are beginning to instigate and regulate outdoor lighting, we are working with the local hardware stores to show materials and that will actually meet the new lighting ordinance. And why? and get them excited about it. So it's a grassroots type of revolution we need. Is there a way of, what about better lighting at desktop level that brings light into users' eyes? Well, this is a tough one because you want to be able to have light what you're seeing, but not into your eyes, because then all of a sudden it becomes too glaring. And with modern, I call it personalized lighting, that you can adjust the lighting and light the surfaces around your desk or the wall behind it. And that is amazing. And that you can move it around, you can dim it, you can turn it to go back, reflected light. I have found that that is some of the best lighting. But Terry, you had a very long answer for her, so go for it.
I did, because as we get more into the light and health, we understand that it is lighting at the eye that is going to make the difference in, for example, setting circadian rhythms. So that light has to get into the eye, and it has to get in as a dose over a period of time and of the right color characteristics and so forth. So we have to think about luminaires and lighting systems that get more light into the eye at certain times of the day. Now, how do we do that? Well, we certainly have to design luminaires where maybe we have to have adjustable candle power distributions, something that changes with the time of day. I'm working with the Light and Health Research Center right now and some colleagues at the American Lighting Association on programs so that we can design residential types of lighting that do just that. And the Light and Health Research Center has prototypes. They worked over in Sweden on a project that has developed such luminaires. This is interesting because it changes the shape, the look, and certainly the intensity of the luminaire. But you're right, we have to be very, very sensitive to glare because glare is important. We don't want it, but we still have to get that light into the eye.
And Terry, I would challenge you and say, what about daylight? What about getting people to look outside and less dependence on electric light during the day?
Absolutely. Having a desk near a window is, to me, an ideal way to do that because that light is there. It is automatically sensitive to the time of day, and it does provide the necessary illumination at the eye. So yes, why doesn't our society pay more attention to daylighting? Why don't we work more with daylighting experts? And I know you're a supporter of that, so you can answer, but I think we have to do that in the future. It's obviously a thing whose time has come.
You know, I'd like to tell a quick story about Steve Squillace, a very well-known member of our community for many years. Steve was diagnosed with some pretty serious heart problems when he was about 55, 60 years old. He's overweight, he had a lot of other problems, and heart was one of them. And he was given a choice, and his choice was to live a better life in all respects, physically, for himself. And one of the things he did every day, and by the way, he lived to be 93, one of the things he did every day was every morning at about 10 o'clock, he'd go for a 15 to 20 minute walk outside. Every day at noon, he took another one. He'd walk the better part of a mile in each case. And every afternoon at 2 o'clock. We have learned since then that something called a Cronauer crossover, which is a time period in the morning and the afternoon where the body readjusts its schedule based on the light it's been receiving. He just happened to pick those times arbitrarily. They happened to be right. He lived to be 93 and was healthier than most of us for most of that period. So I tell that story because I feel the daylighting, the exercise and the daylighting played a overarching role in what happened to Steve and for the rest of his life. So I think we could all take a lesson from that. And the comments about daylighting don't just involve indoors. Take a walk, won't hurt you.
No, I couldn't agree more. And that daylighting should be available to everyone. The equity.
We designed, I'll tell you, we designed one other facility that I can't tell you too much about because of national security interest, but we designed a facility that would have a daylit place you could go to do work, to hang out, to get coffee, to eat, because the rest of the facility was sealed up pretty tight for strategic reasons. And in that space, it had daylight. That was the primary light source, and it had access to the sky and to the sun. And we actually let it be a little bit overlit on purpose. Those sorts of things can be done. And every time we work on it, we've designed buildings that are totally daylighted, all the time for everybody. It
Jim,
takes some architecture there.
You say it's overlit. It was overlit with daylight. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
it's overlit with it. You got 300 or 400 or 500 foot candles, right? That's a lot of daylight, but you do need a little bit more than normal.
Okay.
And then again, just one more thing on that light and health, which was Kathy's question. And then at night, get rid of the blue light. In other words, change the spectrum. Relax.
It's not the blue. It's not the blue. It's the cyan.
Okay, cyan. It's that.
It's 480, 490
nanometers. Right. I wanted to get that technique, but I was trying to be nice.
I know. Well, but you see, that's critical because now that LEDs, this is BIOS has a patent on this about having a 4,000 K light where they remove the cyan and they get rid of the impact of it, or they turn it on and they benefit from that. And they discovered that by working on the International Space Station.
Right.
Okay, we're going to move on. We're going to move on. Michael Graebner, you've been very patient. We've opened your mic. You have a question.
Yes, I'm a little confused about why you people always talk about foot candles when the major change with especially LED lighting is spectral. In other words, for the first time in human history, we have control of the spectrum of lighting. And talking about intensity is like talking about the past.
Okay, Michael, I think we've got your question. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll start, and then I'm sure the others will include. It's both. It's intensity and spectrum. And you are correct. We have a lot more choices in spectrum. But like what Jim had mentioned, that the LED currently standard LEDs has a blue pump, and then it's covered with phosphor to change the spectrum on it. And yes, you can get LEDs with other individual spectrums, but normal lighting that you're going by is the blue pump with the phosphor on it. But the intensity is still always been there of how much light. Yes, you can adapt to lower intensities. I bet many of you have gone out for walks in full moonlight and you can see just fine. And that intensity is like 1/100th of a foot candle. So as we adapt, intensity is there, but spectrum is also there, and they're joined together to work collectively. Jim, Terry?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to toss in real quick that I'm a big believer in spectral timing and spectral tuning, some people call it, or at least be conscious of it. We recently completed a health clinic in Northern California where I purposefully changed all of the lighting mid-project because the technology came along to give me that cyan reinforced wavelengths, which turned out also to contribute to one of the highest CRI products I could get, which is used, and it's very beneficial, not just for the whole wellness thing we've been talking about here, but it's also very beneficial for cyanosis observation index, which means the ability to recognize through observation of a person whether or not they're about to suffer a heart attack or stroke. And cyanosis means cyan in the color in and around the orifices of the body. And if you don't have that color present in the light, you can't see it. And it turns out that this combination of lighting is also reinforces the daytime circadian systems of the people working there, which is another good thing. So it's been very well received. And even like it in the dental area because people can do great color matching of crowns.
All right, Charles Stone, you had a question and we've opened your mic.
You know, I volunteered to help my local gated community in Tucson with their exterior lighting idea, which would be that all the residences left some of their outside lights on. And they told me, no thanks, we're providing LED lamps with integrated photocells to homeowners. We don't need your help. Okay, well, I saw that, Nancy. You averted your eye. Good. And I'm just wondering, how do we deal with this horror? Is this what municipal codes are about? Or, yeah, I was offended for a couple of minutes. I got over it, but
Well,
great
Charles,
to see you. I'll mute myself. Great to see you all.
Oh, Charles, no, I love your stories. And this is a challenge. Again, people think leaving their porch lights on or whatever. I mean, just like Terry and Jim said, they feel this like, oh, I want them to know I'm home. Or what if someone comes up to the door and tries to break in? What we have found that most municipal codes are enacted because people are upset with their neighbor's lighting. And that they go, I want them to turn off those lights. They really bother me. I don't like seeing it in my bedroom window. And if a community is not aware of that, or there aren't people that actually are listened to if they don't like it, yeah, it's this fear of the darkness attitude that it should be just the opposite. And again, like I had mentioned about the moth population and the decrease in what plants and pollinators are doing, it's a big problem. So I don't know, Jim, Terry, any
I was just going to
suggestions?
say, with the advent of motion sensor controlled outdoor lighting and cameras, you can have it perfectly dark all the time, except when you really need it. Pretty simple solution.
Okay, guys, we are going to begin wrapping up, but Allison Thayer, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, more to build off of what Nancy was just saying. My question was about specifically the plants that you mentioned having an effect with that light at night. And I thought that was very fascinating and something I wouldn't have thought about just on my own. And I feel like that's what a lot of people may struggle with is that they're not necessarily aware of the impacts that they're having by turning their lights on at night. So I guess my question was, do we have a plan of action, kind of like you mentioned, education from the bottom up for the general public who may not be thinking about this?
Oh, what a great question. Oh my gosh. Okay, Randy, we need a whole seminar on light at night and plants and pollinators. There's so much, but the research is there, and some of the best is with Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. They saw soybean production going down to less than 40%. All the soybeans that were underneath the street light, and they just don't know how to turn off. I mean, they just grow and grow, and then they get exhausted. And they don't turn off. And it's the color of light and it's the amount of light, but it's a problem. And one of my best friends, who's one of the world famous landscape architects, and she said, Carol Franklin's her name. She said, Nancy, as I asked her about landscape lighting and what about it? She goes, everyone loves to be in the spotlight, but not while we sleep. And I said, got it. Turn the lights off. And I've never forgotten that. But I agree. I think we need a huge education on please don't light the plants.
Let me
Terry?
add to something that I've been worried about for some time, and that is the metrics, the units that we use, not only to talk to the public, but among ourselves and as designers. We need an update. The foot candle is obsolete. That's becoming more and more evident all the time. We shouldn't be building standards and recommendations on foot candles. We should be more subtle than that. We should be more expansive than that. And it is time for the IES and the CIE, of course, too, to take leadership and begin to develop new lighting metrics that serve today's needs. And those metrics should include people, plants, and animals, as well as the traditional ways that we have used those metrics. So it is time, and the new generation will have to do that.
I couldn't agree more, Terry, because another question is, what color of light do plants really don't like? It's green. That's why all plants look green. You know, they reflect it. They want the blue and the red, but they also go into ultraviolet, infrared, and animals, same way. It's a whole new metric where our foot candles are based on our vision, you know, the V lambda and V prime lambda, and not everyone else's vision. So I couldn't agree more with new metrics.
Okay, and on that note, we are going to wrap. I want to thank our panelists, Jim Benya, Terry McGowan, and Nancy Clanton, for a wonderful discussion. We thank the audience for the questions and the feedback. If you had an audio issue, my email is randy@nlb.org. Send it to me so we can always do continuous improvement. And stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be on Monday, 28 February. It's part of our Light and Health series, and that is Out of the Womb, Lighting Up the NICU. And I'll give you a quick teaser. There's a lot of research going on with breastfeeding and light, and Dr. Robert White is going to discuss that. And if you're of childbearing age, you may want to really learn about that. So that's it. We want to thank everyone, and we'll see you next week.